Welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by Emmy award-winning investigative journalists, Earth Files reporter and editor, Linda Moulton Howe, and world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters incident, John Burroughs. And now, leading off tonight's program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
One of the first reporters to investigate the Bentwaters Rendlesham forest mystery and talk to or interview the military eyewitnesses back in 1984 was investigative reporter Chuck de Caro, who then was producing special assignments for CNN in the Washington, D.C. Bureau. Today, Chuck de Caro is president of SAGE, Inc., an acronym for Sea, Aerospace, Ground Evaluations, that he operates in collaboration with periodic assignments for the Department of Defense, Office of Net Assessment, and others, based in McLean, Virginia, across the Potomac River from Washington. After the groundbreaking December 16 to 18, 2017 first official DoD release of UFOs caught on jet fighter gun camera infrared videos in the New York Times and Washington Post front pages, now President Donald Trump is making headlines in his consideration of a preemptive strike against North Korea because that country's leader taunts with nuclear missile weapons tests. So what could happen next? After this short commercial break, Chuck de Caro will join John Burroughs and me on Phenomenon Radio for his perspective of both the UFO infrared video news and the geopolitical challenges in these revolutionary times.
Elizondo is making headlines around the world. He can be seen on every major news network because he disclosed that he's been working on a secret UFO program with the Department of Defense. And he wants to address the UFO community who he says inspired him to release this information. And you can only hear this at the 2018 International UFO Congress. Tickets are going fast for the 2018 International UFO Congress. Get yours at UFOcongress.com. Linda Howe, Steve Bassett, Don Schmidt, and Michael Carter are just a few names you may recognize. However, the UFO Congress is also famous for bringing new, exciting UFO information to our attendees. Find out more about the incredible lineup we have put together at UFOcongress.com. The UFO Congress is in February 2018 in the beautiful desert outside of Fountain Hills, Arizona. We look forward to seeing you there. Get your tickets at UFOcongress.com.
Hi, it's AJ from Vibes, Mind, Body, Spirit. Have you been searching for unique items to create or add to your sacred space? What about tools for your holistic healing? Or those one-of-a-kind magical ingredients to manifest your desires? Well, look no more because Vibes has a variety of items to assist you in your spiritual journey. From crystals to candles, incense to books, tapestries to jewelry, OnlineVibes.com has what you're seeking. We even have some thoughtful and mindful gifts to share with your friends and family too. Visit us at OnlineVibes.com from the comfort of your home or give us a call at 385-244-1099 to have your order beautifully packaged and sent directly to you or a loved one. And right now, take advantage of the coupon code KGRA at checkout to receive 15% off any order. Remember, online, VIBEC.com.
Now, Now you have the inside contact for alternative talk radio. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live exclusively on KGRAradio.com with John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, and tonight's very special guest, Chuck de Caro. Leading off tonight's interview, here's John Burroughs. John?
Chuck, it's good to hear from you. Happy New Year. Thanks for coming on.
Yes.
Okay, John. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Listen, I want to start out with asking a couple questions about the videos and the DoD's involvement in the study of the UFOs. And based on the fact that you do and have worked inside the Department of Defense, and you worked with Andrew Marshall, who is the leading guy for advanced technology, at any point did you or Andrew Marshall know about this program and or any of this technology that's been discussed? Can you explain that from that standpoint, as far as Andrew Marshall's interest in that type of technology before he retired?
Mr. Marshall was interested in the strategic balance of the United States first with Russia, and then he shifted years before anybody else to China. And, he was interested in those things. And, UFOs never entered into any of this. And, I would recommend that everybody read the book, The Last Warrior, which is a biography of Mr. Marshall. We were very lucky to have had him in one position for 43 years and 6 presidents.
Wow.
He is literally the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain, really quiet gentleman who recognized talent and utilized it across 4 decades. To call him spooky is not that at all. He shunned the limelight and did the work quietly across 4.5 decades. I mean, just as the Office of Nev Sessom. Prior to that, he was at RAND and other positions. And his greatness, I think, is leading us to end the Cold War without a nuclear exchange, with the United States coming on top. And I think the country owes a lot to him. So even though it's not my book, it's Andy Krasenovich's book, The Last Warrior is a great read. Imagine just one person, giving constancy and consistency to U.S. strategic thought across the better part of the Cold War. Nothing at all to do with UFOs. None, zero, zip, nada.
Were you aware then of this study or anything involving the DoD's involvement in UFOs?
No, I had, everybody says, well, there's got to be a central place where, I don't think so. And if you look at this particular program, it didn't come from DoD. It came from Harry Reid, and a deal with a couple of other very senior senators at the time, Inouye and Stevens. And now let's look at what $22 million or $25 million, what that amounts to. Across 4 years or 5 years, about $4 million in change a year, which is not a lot of money to research something that, as Linda would say, could revolutionize everything. This was a political deal initiated by Senator Harry Reid, whose reputation for propriety is not unburnished. And doing it because a billionaire in his district, in his state, was curious about this, and Senator Reid managed to extract $22 million or $25 million from a backroom deal in the Senate. They fenced the money. It wasn't black because it was secret. It was black because they were fencing, which is the term they use in Capitol Hill for earmarking money for somebody's personal project. And we realized these guys were all very senior senators at the time. So $25 million gets coughed up, and most of it goes to Bigelow to hire subcontractors to do the research. Okay, that's not the same thing as coming from the inside of DoD saying, hey, we got a real big problem here, and we need to do it. And if it were that kind of revolution, big prize, do you think to give you an idea of scale, $23 million is one modern jet engine. One. So, I'm not trying to poo-poo this. I'm sure they gathered all kinds of cool information, but, where's the rest of it? And if it wasn't a black project, are they hiding this because it was a political favor? It seems to me it's more about hiding embarrassment than it is hiding, an alien space vehicle somewhere.
But Chuck,
that's what I think.
We have
no buts, Linda. That's what I think.
Yes, I know, but the Truman administration during World War II, which does go back to the Cold War period that you are referencing, we have documents that have been verified in libraries. One from Twining, who was personally sent by Harry S. Truman out to the Roswell region in the July week right after the 2nd through the 4th, when the rancher found the material that he could clasp in his hand, and then it would spring back memory metal. And that Twining wrote up a document that no one has ever argued. It is the real deal. And it was talking about that what he was seeing would fall into the category in 1947 July of a water reactor. He was describing in the document to Truman that there were keys that had hieroglyphs on them in the craft. There were tremendous amounts of detail from Twining to Truman right after the crash of 3 wedge-shaped vehicles in the state of New Mexico. Now, that means that for 70-some years, our government, starting with Truman, as I understand it, he executed a classified executive order to bring into existence MJ-12, the businessmen, the science, the medical people that were to be his advisors on the subject of what they called then celestial craft. They referred to them as, extraterrestrial entities, and that it was all to be hushed because they felt that they could not bring it to the public until they had answers. It is now 70-some years later. The first official confirmation of infrared video of something that falls into the UFO UAP category was on the front pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post in mid-December. And that, to me, means that something has changed or shifted inside the Pentagon thinking from Truman's administration, where they were running scared and they didn't know what to do except to slam lids down on everything. Right now, the back, so we'll call it behind the scenes, the energy seems to be that maybe there's a reason why now, that this year of 2018 going forward, that there are policy shifts to open up. We're not alone in this universe, so that they can start opening up all of this stuff that's been hidden for the last 70 years. And your mentor, he had to have known in all of the work that he did.
Well, I can't say that because he certainly did classifications to God, but it never came up. We were always focused on the threats that we're developing, and none of them had to do with alien space vehicles. Everything had to do with how do we maintain the balance of power and keep the United States in ascendancy.
Well, Chuck, can I ask you a question?
Well, let me just finish with Linda first, John. I'll get to you in a second.
Well, it ties into that.
I'm not trying to be impolite. Just let me finish what Linda had to say and come back. Okay, when Nathan Twining wrote that thing, we didn't even have an Air Force. The United States Air Force didn't come out until September 18th, 1947. So
the date the CIA was born.
Well, yeah, let's say after the National Security Act of 1947, which strangely enough will feature prominently when we start talking about North Korea. Anyway, so were there other motivations involved? And here's this brand new baby service, the junior of all the services, where he's looking at something for it to do. Maybe, but we should be at least a little cautious about leaping from one thing to another without proof. Now, look, Linda, as you know, I've been reading about UFOs since I was a kid. I've read all of Ruppel's books and Kehoe's books and everything I get my hands on. When Invisible Horizons came out in 1964, I was 14 years old reading that thing. Right. And so I tend to look favorably with an open mind the possibility of other lives or other life forms in the galaxy. But that doesn't mean that UFOs, unidentified flying objects, are the same thing as alien space vehicles. And as far as the infrared videos, you and I both did, if you recall, 20 years ago in Encounters. Do you remember the piece we did call Intruder on the Range? You remember that?
Yeah, it was.
It looks. Guess what? It looks just like this.
Area 51. Okay. It was the sighting. I was producing the sightings.
It was sightings. Okay.
Yes.
Sightings. Yeah, you're right. And you were the author of that, and they,
Yeah.
They manipulated you, and you wound up out of the the loop.
They wanted to do things that weren't journalistically, so there was tension doing that. But I remember
no argument. But let me do the but first. No, my turn. So if you remember that, and we go back and look, I think you can get that on YouTube still, right? The sightings thing. And I think it was called Intruder on the Range. You will see something that looks just like that. But if you remember what I said at the time, I said, first you have to disprove that it's not a drone or a vehicle of some sort. And I think my quote at the time was, if you can disprove all that stuff, you might have an interesting piece of history. So, if you can disprove all that stuff, I'm with you. Okay? Yep, alien space vehicle. But first you have to disprove stuff. If you recall, they went to a computer guy and said, what is the motion of this thing? Because you got a tracking camera. The tracking camera is slewing to stay on target. And we'll talk about that with the F-18 here in a minute. It's slewing around to stay on the target. Okay, somebody draws what this looked like. And it was a constant radius ascending turn around the radar. Okay? So now I'm going to give you a homework assignment. Okay? I want you to go look up Tacit Rainbow. Okay? And Tacit Rainbow was an autonomous drone in the early 80s that was designed to seek out radar sites, cruise around, and then attack them by maintaining a constant radius turn over it. Now, that was a prior project that did that. It was propeller, or I think Tacit Rainbow was propeller powered. But, they learned how to do that. Could they have built a more advanced one that used, fan propulsion? Maybe. But you need to get rid of that before you jump to that. The other thing is we still don't know how big it was, really, because you're testing it against the sky. There's nothing to compare it to. And the same thing happens with the F-18. It looks just like the video of 20 years ago. And remember, the airplane's in a turn while you're doing this, as it's maneuvering with it. And the pilots, apparently, from what I understand, unless I misread the transcript, they never saw it, eyeballs. They saw the infrared trail. Well, the infrared trail doesn't have the sharp lines of a physical object that you can see. So, determining what shape it is hard to do, because as the infrared radiation goes out, you get this non-precise shape. So it could just be a heat source. And then I referenced something else. Do you remember when the Mexican Air Force went nuts about 15 years ago and they saw multiplicity? It turns out I believe they were flying a Cessna Citation with a FLIR unit, and they locked up on this formation. Well, the problem is they didn't take into account the airplane's motion and the slew rate of the camera. It looked like it was moving, and what they were seeing were oil rigs way the hell out that they couldn't see with their eyeball, but because of the size of the infrared plume, they looked like a formation of, UFOs that weren't even flying. They looked like they were flying. So before I shake hands with you, Linda, my dear friend, and say, yeah, ASV. It's not. We got to disprove all the U in UFO first before we can get to, hey, we're being visited.
Okay, but the Truman administration decided in conjunction with Winston Churchill that they were going to hold the proof close to the vest, and that they felt that the public and the media had to be denied any information about the truth.
Wait. Winston Churchill was out of power.
No.
They only overlapped for a few months before Clement Attlee took over as prime minister. And then he became prime minister again in the 1950s. But by the time that Truman was president, Churchill was out of power.
The reference in Churchill was, there's a document that was released to the National Archive in the UK's about 8 years ago. And it was from the son of a security guard working for Winston Churchill. And the letter was his father, before he died, told the son, the scientist, that he was with Winston Churchill and General Eisenhower. The year was 1943 or 44. And they were the two men, the two leaders were talking about what had just been reported to them from an RAF fighter that had a silver disc that was rotating around the body of the RAF fighter at great speed and doing circles around the plane. And that was the subject. And that Winston Churchill was overheard by the security father to say to General Eisenhower, we must keep this a secret for 50 years in order to prevent the collapse of the stock market, religions, and society. And that is in that letter from the son that the father told him before he died. Now,
so what we got is double hearsay.
Yeah, but that means
but it's double hearsay. Now, at the same time, wait, let's put this in historical perspective. Okay, Churchill was also the guy, the prime mover in a gigantic deception effort called Bodyguard. Okay, Operation Bodyguard. And Churchill is quoted, "In war, truth is so precious that it must be surrounded by a bodyguard of lies." That's his quote. Okay? And he created a gigantic deception organization, okay, called Bodyguard, that screened for the invasion of Normandy. I referenced to you Anthony K. Brown's book, Bodyguard of Lies. And there are subsequent books that expand upon the deception efforts. So who knows what the Bodyguard was overhearing of Churchill and Eisenhower. Maybe it was designed to get out. I don't know. But understand that of all people, to quote Churchill, who is the father of modern deception, not really a good idea, Linda. Oh, and I reference those books. Don't trust me. Go read the books. Bodyguard of Lies.
That is a data point about the history of why they were deciding that they had policies of denial, and that it is those policies of denial, that decision, that has affected the last 70 years, while all kinds of secret programs have been developing and back engineering technology that have been retrieved from the crashes of advanced technologies, in which case I have heard some scientists say that they've had their hands on stuff that they had no idea what to do with or how to even analyze. Those are the areas where we've all been kept in the dark. And now, Chuck, have you, before December 16th and 18th, the New York Times and the Washington Post, had you ever heard in your work for the Pentagon anything about the advanced aerospace threat identification program on the 5th floor in the C ring of the Pentagon?
No.
But it existed. And Lewis Ellis.
But again, but think about this, how it got there. It was forced on the Pentagon by Harry Reid, who wanted to please one of his constituents who had $1 billion. Before you do anything, Linda, go back and see if Bigelow or Bigelow Aviation contributed to the re-election fund of Harry Reid. I'll bet you there's a connection there. This is from some deep dark in the soul of the Pentagon. Okay. Oh my God, we got to learn about this. This is somebody with a check who's written for $25 million to go and look at this thing to please one of his constituents. Come on.
Bob Bigelow. It's Bigelow Aerospace, and he
Right.
has contracts with NASA for the development of these blow-up buildings to put on the moon and Mars. And so it is in his interest to talk with the Nevada senator about his interest in the possibility of other intelligence in this solar system.
I don't understand. How does a pressurized, rotating, expandable space station launched by chemical rockets have anything to do with unidentified flying objects? He's already developed the technology outside of that. He was simply curious about it, talked to his senator, and the senator said, hey, yeah, you're a billionaire in my neighborhood? No problem here. Let me write a check so he can send. And where did the money go? It went to Bigelow.
Well,
Bigelow Aerospace to be the prime contractor to go look at this stuff.
He was on 60
You know,
Minutes.
as a journalist, a fellow or a former journalist anyway, you know, my curiosity is, whoa, where'd the rest of the $25 million go? And
Well,
why were we funding this project with subcontractors? Come on, Linda.
Well, lots of subcontractors are hired because it's easier for the government to deal with subcontractors. It takes FOIA off their back, and they've been doing this for decades, subcontracting all kinds of highly classified matters to Lockheed and Boeing and now Robert Bigelow Aerospace.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Do we know that this thing was classified and at what level? It was dark money, because it was a political favor. It came from Harry Reid. Is this Werner von Braun we're talking about? Is this Albert? No, it's Harry Reid. Come on.
Well,
that's where the money came from, and it was satisfying a political constituent who got a good chunk of the $25 million to go satisfy his curiosity. What do we taxpayers get out of it?
Well, you know more about the innards of the Pentagon than we do. Do you feel if $22 million was allocated through Congress because of the Nevada senator?
That's one jet engine, Linda. In terms of the Pentagon, one jet engine. If the Pentagon, in its deepest, darkest soul, said, oh, my God, we've got a huge national security threat, do you think they think of one jet engine's cost is all the money they would throw at this thing? Come on.
Not talking about the money. It is that it physically existed on the 5th floor in the C ring of the Pentagon, which means it was
what does the 5th floor got to do with it?
It was given space in the Pentagon.
Now, if it was on the second floor on the E ring next to the SecDef, that'd be fine. But in the C ring, you're buried in the middle and you get nosebleed climbing the stairs to get up there.
But
everybody has this idea that the Pentagon is the Taj Mahal. It's not. It's a great big government building that only a few years ago, had rats in the cellar and lead paint and sewer pipes that were bursting from corrosion. And they finally got around to redoing, but it's still not the Taj Mahal. Okay, there's nothing. It's just a very efficient office building with, I believe, 11 miles of corridors, designed so you can get from one end to the other, from the bottom to the top on the other side of the Pentagon inside of 5 minutes. That's why it's shaped that way.
Where did Mr. Marshall have his office?
On the second floor. I'm not going to tell you where it is.
Who was on the 5th? Who was on the 5th? No. Who do you know has been on the 5th? It
depends on it depends. Get offices all over the Pentagon. One of the best offices from the 80s was a thing called Checkmate, and where then Colonel John Warden, who was the father of Instant Thunder and the fight in Desert Storm, ran a thing called Checkmate. It was buried down in the cellar, in the second level of the cellar. The only way you could find it was a legendary place called the Purple Water Cooler, and someone had literally taken a water bottle and painted it purple so you'd know where you were in the warren down there. There were rats down there in the 80s. Okay, it was terrible. The air was awful. There's nothing magic about where you are in the Pentagon, except there's no other room anyplace else, Colonel. So you and your advanced thinkers go down and live in the cellar for a while.
Well, let me ask
Come
you a
on.
question about the second video that was released, the 2 minutes and 45 seconds that's longer, no pilots.
Yeah.
And this is David Fravor, the Navy commander, who was the one who saw and ran the gun camera. And he said...
Wait. Did you ask him, Dave, did you see the thing? And his answer is going to be no, but I could see it on the Tizio, on the infrared viewer.
Yes.
That's how old I am. I still call it Tizio, which is television infrared search electro-optical Tizio.
Yes, and it was
which, by the way, goes back to 1968, believe it or not.
It was the motion on the infrared of the unidentified that was in the middle of the gun camera and sights. And then it takes off. What some people in doing calculations said could have been 96,000 miles an hour. Now,
except did anybody look at the slew rate of the camera?
Okay, go into that.
Was the camera moving? All right, you're holding your cell phone camera, okay? All right, and you're pointing it at John, big target. Sorry, John. Okay, and now you take your hand and you move it in a circular motion, at level, and John seems to disappear from frame because the camera's moving. So you need to know, what was the slew rate of the camera at the time the thing was doing 96,000 miles an hour?
Well, it was Commander Fravor's testament.
Answer me. Did Commander, the good Commander...
Listen, there comes to a point where you have to at least give some deference to somebody who has been a Navy commander for 18 years, and he says that what he saw...
How is a Navy commander an expert on UFOs?
What he saw on his infrared scope was he'd never seen anything like it before, and that the motion was so fast, and that's where people have done these calculations, and that talking about the slew rate, I have to assume that the commander, the Navy commander, a skilled Navy flight commander, is not going to be fooled by slew.
Well, I don't know. The point is that camera isn't fixed to the nose of the airplane. It can move left to right and up and down to stay locked up on a target. Did he go to manual? At the time? I don't know. But you need to ask him that before we can go on to the next step.
Well, what about?
But I can assure you though that what I'm talking about, the mechanical part of this, the slew rate, is a real deal. Okay, because the camera has to move with a target, right?
Wouldn't an 18-year-long naval fighter flight pilot, he would know this, and he's putting his whole life and employee behind this. And that leads, though, to the person who has represented all of this and who directed the office in the Pentagon for 5 years, Luis Elizondo. Do you know Luis Elizondo?
No, I don't. But I can tell you, let's talk about a couple of things first to go with this. I believe that the good commander saw something on his scope. Not with his eyeballs, on his scope. I believe that. It's there. What it is open for debate. Just like the guys, the sightings adventure there at Nellis, and just like the Mexican Air Force mistaken identity of the venting burning gas from oil platforms that were almost over the horizon. Okay, I don't disbelieve him. He saw a UFO or something masquerading as a UFO, some phenomena we're not afraid of. But before you can go and say it's an ASV, you have to disprove the U in unidentified. And you have to look at the thing and say, could some other motion been induced by, let's say, the movement of the camera? Maybe. Let's go look at that before we jump to anything. Linda, look, I'm with you. I believe that life exists in other parts of the universe, for sure. Okay? Did it come to visit the good commander, that thing? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not.
Chuck, well, that's my question I was going to ask about 20 minutes ago, okay? Once you did, that's okay. Once you did Bentwaters, you went while you were still at CNN before you left and started working for the DoD. You you hooked up with was it Colonel Bearden or was it Colonel Bearden?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was something else. That was RF weapons.
Okay, I understand, but let me finish.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got interested in this. We were behind the Soviets. One of the projects inside the DoD, one of the reasons why they justified this was they were looking at the possibility of the Chinese, or mostly the Russians, had developed some technology that was ahead of us, including what Bearden was working on, right?
Right.
So at any time, based on the fact that Andy Marshall looked at Cold War stuff and the Russians and how the technology and everything else to do, and your work, were you ever asked to look at, tape, radars, or whatever of technology that they weren't sure what it was? And at any point, if you did, was there something you could not really readily identify as being Russian?
No, never. God, come on. We've been friends for a long time. Even when you are on active duty with the Air Force, did I respect you? I respected your privacy. When I interviewed you the first time, you said you didn't want to talk. Okay. So, I understood that you've been through a traumatic event and let you, not worry about it, because I know you wanted to career in the Air Force, and it wasn't worth 30 seconds on the evening news to destroy somebody's career. Okay.
Right.
And you know that we've been friends a long time. Okay.
Right.
And so when I go out, I'm naturally curious and went to look at this. But, how many years have you and I and Linda talked about what the other possibilities could be? When we first met, you were pretty convinced that it was an alien space vehicle. But now you've gone out and you've read about all this other stuff about electromagnetic interference with brain function, that kind of stuff. Some of the stuff that I tossed in your general direction, some that you went and researched yourself and said, it might be this, it sort of broadened it. All I'm doing is what you're doing. Not sure what it was, but it could have been this because it fits the characteristics of that.
Right, and that's my question, though. That's my question with inside the DoD now. I'm not trying to zero in on aliens or anything like that.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why they allocated this money was some of the concern was we could be dealing with technology that the Russians developed. And at any point in time, was there any of that technology out there that was a concern that you were aware of, and was it identified or anything?
Yeah, but I did that while I was at CNN, and the technologies had to do with electromagnetic weapons, okay? In 1983, the Pentagon produced a pamphlet, a nice one, called Soviet Military Power, and I read the whole book, and the only thing in that book that I had no knowledge of was a single phrase, radio frequency weapons. And so I talked to my boss, Ted Kavanaugh, who was the vice president of CNN, and the boss of Special Assignment, said, I want to go research this. And as it happened, just about that time, Ted Turner called and said, I got this friend of mine who's a chemist, and he's got this thing called the woodpecker. Could you go look into that? Well, it happened to dovetail with what I was doing, and as long as Ted was about ready to fund the thing, I could go out and do the research. And I did, and that came out in the Zap Gap at CNN, and then for the Atlantic, and then for the Washington Post. All interested in this new, technology of, electromagnetic interface or man-machine interface with human thought and thinking processes.
Right.
Yeah. So sure, I go look into that.
Right. I understand. But what I'm trying to get at is, at any time in your DoD career, or your work with Andy Marshall, was there anything that was identified in the sky that couldn't be clarified to what it was?
No. Let me tell you about some stories, some anecdotes, to give you an idea of how some of this stuff works. Have you ever heard of the Shillelagh missile?
No.
Okay. The Shillelagh missile in the early 1960s was a big hurry-up project in the U.S. Army, because we found out that the Soviets had this magic tank that could not only float, which it could, okay, but it could shoot a guided missile or an artillery shell. And we went bananas trying to build a Shillelagh missile, 152 millimeter, and put it into a device called a Sheridan air-droppable tank, okay? Years, and we spent all kinds of money. You put a shell in, shoot it, then you open up the breech and you put this missile in, you hook up the wires, you shoot it, and you guide it to the target. And it cost a fortune. Except after the Cold War that we learned about the Russians tank. And what they did was they had a conventional gun, and they welded a rail to the top of the gun, and they put the rocket on the rail. And one shot, that's all you had, because now you had to get out of the tank to shoot it again. Well, the intelligence that said the Russians had got a missile gun on a tank, was misinterpreted. And off we went trying to build technology. And remember that intelligence is not perfect. You have to get kind of in the ballpark. To go back to Churchill, there were incredibly acrimonious debates between Lord Charwell, who was chief scientist for Churchill, and Reginald V. Jones, who was the head of Air Technical Intelligence, on interpreting the intelligence. Well, a wonderful woman by the name of Constance Baddington Smith, who wrote a book of her adventures in the RAF called Air Spy, was the first one to find a V-2. And Charwell said, no, it's a torpedo. And he pointed out that, no, it's an 80-foot-long torpedo. It won't fit in a U-boat. And the argument back and forth, it couldn't possibly be a rocket. Well, these things start landing in London, and you start to believe. So there's always this fog between, your intelligence gathering and analyzing it and then reacting to it. Okay? And again, I refer you to The Last Warrior about this process in net assessment. Okay?
John?
Yeah, no,
John?
I understand, but again, it's not that I'm saying you're avoiding the question, but so at no time is there, well, I guess the final answer that I'm looking for is everything that's flying around out there the United States government is aware of and it's been identified.
No, that's why the Air Force are the folks that invented the term unidentified flying object. We don't know what the hell it is, okay? But that's very different from alien space vehicle, because we learned about stuff, and I'm not trying to cover for the Air Force. I think there are unexplained out there that has to be something that we don't understand. But is it natural phenomenon? Is it one-time? Is it a cosmic phenomenon? Or is it an alien space vehicle? Okay, all I'm trying to do is go forward, because I, like you, believe there's intelligent life out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of want to see it and measure it before I jump to that conclusion.
Well, Chuck,
we're all, the three of us are all believers, but the discipline that I bring to this is that let's make sure it's not something else first.
Chuck,
I don't fault you for believing in this stuff at all.
Why do you think that Luis Elizondo decided on these two specific infrared videos to release for the first time in the history of the United States with official DoD backing, and do it on the front pages of the New York Times first and the Washington Post second? Why these specific videos?
It's easy. He was out of a fun job. I'd like to have that job. It would be a blast. Okay? But the money ran out.
No, I'm asking.
The money ran out.
No, Chuck, why these specific? Because you are critical.
Oh, I don't.
They must know what would be the reason that they selected the two, 134 seconds, 245. Why do you think they selected those two to release first?
Well, maybe because it was, again, the reason why they released it, and I don't know, you have to go ask Mr. Elizondo about this, is, were these things classified and subsequently declassified? And if they were declassified, at whose request? Okay, because now you have to justify why we spent $25 million of taxpayers' money with apparently no result. And maybe these are the ones that, were problematic that were decided to release. Now, there's a lot of things that fly in the sky that one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. The classic case of the U-2, the SR-71 and the F-117 in its classified days, people bumped into those things and going, gee, what could this be? So, again, there's a lot of things out there that go bump in the night that one hand of the government is operating that the other hand doesn't know about. If you look at the history of the U-2, the origins of Area 51, do you know how Area 51 gets started? Because because the CIA wanted to hide the U-2 from the Air Force more than it wanted to hide it from the Russians. So Kelly Johnson, who was the head of Advanced Development Project at Lockheed, turns to Tony LeVere, the best test pilot, and said, "Hey, can you find a remote flight for us, so we can go test this thing?" And, Tony, having been flying around in California testing airplanes, knew the dry lakes. So if you look and you go due west of Burbank, what do you think you hit? Tonopah, the dry lake, due west. And you know how he tested to see if he could land on the flat? He used to like the shot put. So he had some shot put balls, and he dropped it out of his personal airplane. And when he bounced on the surface, he can land here. And he landed. The problem with that place is the winds blow so hard that quarter-inch pebbles go flying through the sky. That's how it gets started. There's no magic. It was a convenient place for Lockheed to go test under Richard Bissell's contract to, create the CIA, create the U-2. And even the U-2 was a low-budget entry because they took the fuselage from an F-104, took out the T-tail, put a conventional tail, and slapped glider wings on it. If you look, the telltale design key is when you get in the cockpit of the U-2, the canopy swings to the left, just like it does in the 104. It's exactly the identical canopy and canopy design.
So it was a hybrid. It was a hybrid. It was a hybrid of two different planes to save money.
Yeah, of course. Lockheed was noted for that. They never lose anything. Look at the P-38. You've heard of the P-38, another Kelly Johnson design World War II? What do you think? They got that stupid tail. Those inverted C tails on the P-38? Those vertical stabilizer, that piece is off of one of the Hudson bombers. Take a look. Let's take it there, boom, snap it right on. Engineers aren't stupid, and they tend to be very, very thrifty. Look at Grumman, and when they built the World War II Cat series, the fuselage were there were commonality in the fuselage and canopy on the F-4F, the F-6S, and the TBF torpedo bomber. They all look like Grumman airplanes because they were, built around the same design criteria, expanded or contracted depending on what you want to do with the airplane. And Lockheed's the same way. They never forgot anything.
Well, you asked earlier about the link between Robert Bigelow Aerospace, receiving the large share of the $22 million allocated by True Harry Reid. And on not quite a year ago, on May 28th, 2017, on that Sunday, CBS's 60 Minutes, in a segment, they interviewed Robert Bigelow, and this is a direct quote. "I am absolutely convinced that aliens exist. The alien presence is just right under people's noses," close quote. And it is allegedly because he has inside information through the work he's doing in Bigelow Aerospace to speak so confidently about an alien presence.
Okay, so is this his personal belief, or has he got one in his garage?
Maybe the latter.
He's in the business of marketing Bigelow Aerospace. Can you make statements like that? Yeah. Does it help? Yeah. Does it help his notoriety? Yeah. I'm a billionaire. I believe in UFOs. Did he say he believes in it because he's seen it or because he wants to believe it? Linda, I'm not trying to be hard on you, but the point is, there's objective facts that need to be laid in like a brick wall that aren't there yet. There are too many holes in this wall.
But there are a lot of people who have government contracts who have firsthand knowledge of an alien presence, and they cannot speak because they have signed non-disclosure agreements, and Robert Bigelow would be in that category.
Yeah, kind of. But again, I think that this thing was more of a good deal for Robert Bigelow than it was of a deep-seated desire within the Department of Defense to go forward and explore the UFO phenomena.
Well, why do you?
Again, it came from outside money. It wasn't requested in the budget. it came from the senators who were trying to satisfy a constituent.
Why do you think that Luis Elizondo's fifth floor office, why was it called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program?
Because you could hide it a lot more easier than saying, this is the UFO office. Wouldn't that be fun? Did you see that on the door, UFO office?
Well,
come on. It doesn't say the Advanced Alien Threat Environment. It's a way to cover a good deal for Bob Bigelow. He's curious about it. The government pays him to go look. You know, the bigger story in this is, what the hell were these guys thinking? $25 million to satisfy a constituent? That's not black money. You know, it's not for a black project. It's pork barrel. Think about it. Linda, you were a journalist in Denver. You remember what pork barrel projects are. One politician makes promises and pays them off with a contract for the government. Mm-hmm. Happens all the time. Why is it that that Bigelow, it was Bigelow's idea, and Bigelow got most of the part of the contract because he knew Senator Harry Reid? I'd like to know how much money Bigelow contributed to the re-election campaign. I'll bet you there's a link there.
Yeah,
I mean, I think as a former journalist, because I'm not doing it right now, geez, how do you come off with $25 million just because you ask your favorite senator and he cuts a deal in the back with some other folks and you get the lion's share of that to go satisfy your curiosity? Oh, that's a lot more closer to me to waste, fraud, and abuse than it is to honest-to-God UFO research.
Well, Chuck, can you take all of the experience and knowledge that you have and jump to the other side if you were working now in the Department of Defense with firsthand knowledge? You've had telepathic communication with non-human beings. You have been in a craft. You've gone to Mars. There's a lot of assertions that have been made on, we'll call it the other side, asserting that there is this reality that has been hidden since World War II. If you were on that side, can you look through that lens of having all of the knowledge that we're not alone, having all of the knowledge that there is an alien presence on this planet, all of the knowledge that there are other kinds of drones by aliens throughout the solar system and beyond? Then what would your particular, I guess, your particular stance be with the public and the media?
Well, first of all, what makes you think it would be in DoD? Why do you say that? Because remember, in DoD, you got a lot of privates who see a lot of things. If you were in charge, what would you do? Okay, well, I'm afraid of panic, so you need to keep this thing not in the military. You need to keep it in a family across generations, just like the mob does. Okay. That's the kind of secrets that you're keeping. Okay, so where's the family?
Okay, yeah, paint that picture for us.
Oh, no, think about it, just logic. Where would you, how do you keep a secret for 70 years? It's not in DoD. It's somewhere else because, the triplicate copies, that's how the Bentwaters file came out. Do you remember that? Some reserve unit got a copy and it came out in a FOIA request for something else.
Right.
When you say a family, the Rockefellers.
Or or corporations, Chuck, it seems to me that Philip J. Corso added that big puzzle piece in the day after Roswell when he said that General Arthur Trudeau in the Pentagon asked him to hand carry extraterrestrial technology to places like Lockheed and Corning Glass. They were using a whole wide variety because they had so many things they didn't understand. And that then the goal became to get the corporations to patent and back engineer, because then the public would never have any ability through FOIA or anything else to get information from the government.
Nah, I read Phil Corso's book, and he makes a pretty good argument. But there was always this scientific inertia coming out of the war that was going in that direction anyway. I don't believe his conclusions. And if Phil Corso was that great, how come he only made it to lieutenant colonel?
Well, let's assume that what he described is correct. and that you
Okay,
have
all right.
knowledge.
Pick one thing that he described, and I'll give you the counter argument. Go ahead. Let's start with fiber optics.
Yeah, that was a description by a rancher. I actually talked firsthand with a rancher in Corona all the way back to somewhere like around 1980, 81. And we went to a place that he said, I want to show you an area that is like what Mac Brazel, who was a friend and a rancher. And Mac Brazel is the one who went to the Roswell sheriff and said, there is this silver material on my ranch. Okay, so when I was talking with this rancher, he was telling me about his friend, Mac Brazel, and that we were standing in an area. He said, this is like the land that he was walking, and there was a horrible secret. And this was the first time I heard that phrase from a Corona rancher. And he said, I knew Mac Brazel for years, and he told me, and he told, remember, Frank Jordan was the radio broadcaster in Roswell.
Right.
And that I talked about this very same thing with Frank Jordan. And Jordan said, the day that I was on the radio, I was talking live. The door opened into the radio studio, and everybody knew not to come in when I was on the air. But there was Mac Brazel. And he walked in, and I motioned to him that I was on the air, and he didn't leave. And he walked over to the wall in front of me, and he sank his back against the wall. And he said, that man went all the way to the floor with his cowboy boots. He said, I remember how his knees were bent above his cowboy boots as he sunk to the floor. And he just sat there until I finished. And when I got off and I said, Mac, what's wrong? He didn't get up from the floor. He said, Mac Brazel looked up at me and said, they aren't green, they're gray.
Linda, we've got to hold on that because we'll do our first break.
This 50-minute uninterrupted segment of Phenomenon Radio is brought to you by OnlineVibes.com, your personal connection to mind, body, and spirit. And there